Welcome everyone to another week of Ramban ala Parsha. It would be hard to claim that Tetzaveh is the most exciting parsha in the Torah. It deals primarily, almost exclusively, with Big Day Zahav and how you anoint Cohanim to play their role in the Mishkan. It obviously doesn't. It's not obvious, but as a fact, it doesn't mention Moshe. It's the only parsha in the Torah from the beginning of Shmos that doesn't mention Moshe. Obviously, Moshe is a big player. HaKadosh Baruch Hu speaks to him, but his name is absent. His brother's name is all over the parsha. Aaron, all over the place. Okay? General observations. I'd like to do 3 Rambans today, 2 in Pshuto Shel Mikra, in what the Big Day Kahuna mean and what's going on in the Mishkan. And the third, a much, much bigger idea, a philosophic idea of the Ramban that at first, seems kind of shocking to us, but then hopefully will make a lot of sense. Okay, let's start at the beginning of the Parsha. The Parsha begins at the end of Perek Chav Zayin, and then you have the beginning of Perek Chav Ches. V'ata hakrev elecha et Aaron achicha ve'et banav ito mitoch b'nei Yisrael lecha hanoli Aharon Nadav va'avihu Elazar v'itamar b'nei Aharon. Right, a classic pasuk for Parshas Tetzaveh, because Va'ata refers to Moshe Rabbeinu, but he's sort of the off-screen person here. His name isn't mentioned, and then of course Aaron's name is mentioned twice, right? Mitoch b'nei Aharon Nadav va'avihu Aharon achicha, etc. And then the pasuk we want to talk about. Va'asita big day kodesh li Aharon achicha lechavon u'letifaret. Right? The Torah says, make special big day kahuna for Aaron, and it describes it as lechavod u'letifaret. And the Ramban obviously wants to know, what does that mean? So says the Ramban, lechavod u'letifaret, pasuk bet, sheyihiyen nichbad u'mifoar b'malbushim nichbadim u'foarim. Right? The Kohen Gadol should be dressed in beautiful clothing, k'mo shamar hakatuv, kechatan yechahen per, like a chasan at his wedding is resplendent in beautiful clothing. Ki ela habigadim levushay malchutem bidmutam yilbishu hamelachim bizman haTorah. Says the Ramban, maybe the most important line in this Ramban, the Big Day Kahuna reflect or are copies of perhaps, royal clothing. It says Ramban, if you saw the Kohen Gadol, you would think to yourself, he looks like the king, because that's the intention of the Big Day Kahuna, to make him look like a king. Now, you could raise the question, the Ramban doesn't raise it, and it's an interesting discussion to have. Wait, why does the Torah want to make him look like a secular king? Isn't that of Chukosem lo selechu? I think that's a topic that deserves some focus and some discussion. When we're allowed to sort of borrow from secular culture, and when it's completely usur to use secular culture as a model for what we do. But the Ramban is clear, right? He's going to look like a king. Va'asa lo ketonet pasim perush mirukemet kidmut pasim vi ketonet tashbeitz kemoshe peresh vihulbishu kiben malchei kedem. Right? He wears beautiful woven clothing like princes do. Okay, v'chein haderech b'meilu kitonet v'katuv ve'aleh kitonet pasim. So first of all, you get the sense that the kitonet pasim that Yaakov Avinu made for his son Yosef, it wasn't just a beautiful garment. It was a kingly garment, and the brothers were so offended by it, especially because it wasn't just like Yosef had a nicer jacket than they did. Yosef had a striped jacket of the type that Big Day, that Yaldei Melachim, that princes and kings had, and the brothers felt like, Yaakov was placing Yosef above them, which in fact he was doing. So it sort of sheds light on that parsha in Bereshis. Okay, then a second parsha that it sheds light on, V'katuv v'aleh kitonet pasim Ki kein tilbashna benot hamelach habitulot me'ilim, uperush ki aleh kitonet pasim nireit v'nigleit. Right? The king's virgin daughters, the princesses in the palace, wore striped clothing with a garment on top. Ki haminhag lilbosh benot hamelach habitulot me'ilim Shetitalafna bahen. They wore special clothing, special striped clothing, and they wore a wrap above it, but you could see the clothing beneath it. V'nimtza shektonat hapasim aleh malbush elyon. So it was the top layer of the clothing that they wore. V'lachein amar ktonat hapasim ashaleh kira'ah. Right? Very, very sad story. When Amnon rapes Tamar, the psukim there describe that she's wearing ktonat hapasim. And says Ramban, yeah, that was the uniform of the Betulot who lived in the house of the Melech, and people knew who they were. Okay, so that's the first garment, the ktonat pasim. Second, v'hamitznefet, the crown, the head covering that they wore, yidua gam hayom limlachim l'sarim hagdolim, says the Ramban, even in my day, you see royal people, you see nobility wearing head coverings. V'lachen amar katuv b'nefol hamalchut haser hamitznefet v'harem ha'atara. When a kingdom falls, the pasuk says haser hamitznefet, take off the head covering, because that's the head covering of a king. I'm skipping a little bit in the Ramban. V'ha'ephod v'ha'choshen levush malchut. Same exact thing for the ephod and the choshen. They are kingly garments. Skipping it a little bit again. V'hatchelet gam hayom lo yorim ish et yado lilbosh chutz mi melech goyim. Right? The idea of tchelet, which is now coming back into vogue, you know, it is not a shir on halachas of tcheles, but the idea that people are wearing tcheles now more and more is something that you see. And more the people who did the research on the tchelet, I just actually read a book on tchelet, they point out it was the royal blue was what nobility wore. It was extremely expensive. And to have tchelet, you know, it will last forever because the colors don't run. That's what tchelet means. And so says the Ramban, nowadays, if you see somebody wearing a royal blue garment, you know that he's nobility, because a regular person would never wear it. Uksiv, tying it into Purim. Mordechai yatzam lifnei melech bilevush malchut tchelet v'achur v'ateret zahav gedolah v'sachrich butz v'argaman. Mordechai also wore, when he came out from the king, and he was now part of the king's cabinet, and he's now an advisor to Achashverosh, so he wore a beged of tchelet, right? That's a sign in those days that the person wearing it is unique, that the person wearing it is favored by the king, that the person wearing it is part of the ruling class. Okay, so the Ramban says basically, very fundamentally, what's the big day kahuna? The big day kahuna were bigadim that anybody would recognize as being unique. One, because it's beautiful, but two, because it's the type of clothing that are worn by royalty. And so when you looked at the Kohen Gadol, when you looked at the Cohanim, you had no choice but to think of them as being royal, which they were. Again, in halachic sense, not in the secular sense. But that's exactly the point. Now, I'm skipping till the end of this Ramban. Says the Ramban in the last few lines. V'hayu, you know, once the begadim are so important, so another Ramban says, V'hayu ha-begadim tzrichin asiya lishman. Right? It can't just be that you buy bigadim that look like big day kahuna. No, they have to be made lishman. V'yitachen sheyu tzrichin kavana. Right? There's a difference between lishma and having kavana. Lishma is, okay, they're being made l'shem big day kahuna, but the kavana requires something more. The kavana is some intention, some positive intention when you make the begadim to achieve a level of kedusha. V'lachein amar va'ata tidaber al kol chachmei lev Hashem militiv ruach chachma sheyavinu ma sheyasu. Right? If they're going to be made by chachmei lev, people need to explain to the chachmei lev exactly what their intention has to be. Obviously, their intention is well beyond us, certainly well beyond me, but the idea is that big day kahuna can't be bought off the rack, right? They have to be made l'shem big day kahuna with kavana for whatever the big day kahuna are supposed to be. Okay, so that's the first Ramban we want to do. Big day kahuna, lechavon l'tifaret. When you looked at them, you saw royalty, because those are the begadim that royalty wore. Okay, next. something that's fascinating to us. Same parak Chav Ches, Pasuk Lamed. Says the Torah, V'nasata el choshen hamishpat et ha'urim ve'et ha'tumim v'hayu alev Aharon b'vo'od lifnei HaShem v'nasa Aharon et mishpat b'nei Yisrael al libo lifnei HaShem tamid. Okay? What are, literally, physically, what are the Urim v'Tumim? Right? We know where they go, but they're never explained in the Psukim. So the Ramban starts by quoting in Ibn Ezra, and then he says it's completely wrong. It doesn't make any sense, and literally, v'lo amar klum, he didn't say anything. So what are the Urim v'Tumim? So he says, aval heim ki divrei Rashi. What does that mean? What does Rashi say? Kitav shel shem hamiforash natun bein kiflei hachoshen. Right, the choshen, the breastplate, was folded backwards. It was made relatively long with a fold in it, and it was folded backwards. And says Rashi, and the Ramban completely endorses this, that the Urim v'Tumim were the Shem HaMeforash, literally the name of God, that was put in the folds, right? So if it's folded up backwards, so you can place a piece of paper, a piece of cloth, a piece of parchment in between the two folds, and it will stay there. V'lachein, says the Ramban, hutzrach liyot kaful, right? The choshen had to be folded over so that you could put something in it. V'hare'aya kilona. How does he know this? How does the Ramban know that when we think of Urim v'Tumim, certainly when I was a child, and maybe till relatively recently, I thought the Urim v'Tumim were the breastplate and the jewels that are in the breastplate, but they're not. Says the Ramban, how do I know this? V'hare'aya ki lo nizkeru Urim v'Tumim klal b'maaseh ha'umanim. Right? There is no pasuk that describes for us what the Urim v'Tumim are, how they were supposed to be made, what maaseh, what maaseh choshev was. Nothing. V'lo hizkiram lahem b'tzavah v'lo b'maaseh klal. They don't appear any place. U'pireit b'begadim vayas et ha'ifod vayas et ha'choshen. With respect to all the big day kahuna, it tells you have to make them. V'lo amar vayas ha'urim v'hatumim. It never says that with respect to the Urim v'Tumim. V'ilu haya ma'aseh charash v'chacham. Let's say you actually had to make the Urim v'Tumim, and they were a result of the artistry and the artisanship of the people who made the Mishkan. Haya ma'arich b'hem yoter min hakol. This should have been a really, really long description of the intricate, ornate way that you make the Urim v'Tumim. And let's say the Torah doesn't want to describe it. It's so secret. The Urim v'Tumim was so holy. The Torah doesn't want to tell us how they're made. So fine. Haya omer, the Ramban makes up a pasuk. V'asita Urim v'Tumim kasher heraotcha bahar zahav tahor ta'aseh otam o kesef mizukak. They're made of gold. They're made of silver. The Torah could have said, without revealing the secret of the Urim v'Tumim, how they're made. But it doesn't. Another proof, says the Ramban, really like a fantastic grammar proof. Va'od tashuv tireh, ki lo hizkir behei hayidiyah echad mikol hakelim shelo nizkerum kvar. When the Torah says ha'aron, ha'menorah, ha'shulchan, with the hey hayidiyah, it means the Torah has already described for us how that kli was made. But in the first instance, it says, Aval amar va'asu aron, va'asita shulchan, va'asita menorah, v'chein kulam. And with respect to the Mishkan, the Ramban says, Mishkan amar ve'et ha'mishkan taseh. Why does it have a hey hayidiyah? Ba'avur shekvar hizkiru va'asu li mikdash. Because the commandment to build the Mishkan was already made. So it refers to it with the hey hayidiyah, that Mishkan. Now says the Ramban, v'hinei, Be'urim v'Tumim amar v'natata el choshen hamishpat et ha'urim ve'et hatumim. But lo tzivoto ba'asiyatam. But it never told us how to build it, how to make it. V'hizkiram ha'katuv behei hayidiyah v'lo hizkiram ha'katuv rak b'Moshe levado shamar b'tzavah v'natata el choshen hamishpat. It sounds like Moshe Rabbeinu made the Urim v'Tumim himself, uniquely. Uv'ma'aseh, and then l'maisa, how did they make it? Vayiten el hachoshen et ha'urim v'et ha'tumim, ki lo hayu ma'aseh uman, v'lo haya la'umanim, v'lo lekahal Yisrael bohem ma'aseh v'lo nedava klal. They were not a ma'aseh uman. Literally, Moshe Rabbeinu took out a cloth and wrote the Shem HaMeforash on that cloth and put it in. Vehe aval heim sod masur lemoshe mipi hagvura v'hu kitavam b'kedusha. It was a secret that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave to Moshe Rabbeinu, and he wrote it b'kedusha. V'hayu ma'aseh shamayim ulekach yazkirim stam ubidiyah. Therefore, the Torah doesn't mention how to do it, but it refers to it as if we know. Kimo vayashkein mikedem ligan Eden et hakiruvim. Right, when God banned Adam and Chava from Gan Eden, so he put kruvim there. So, having mentioned the kruvim before, the Torah refers to them as if we know what they are. V'hinei Moshe lakach ktav ha'urim v'hatumim v'hinicham sham b'choshen hamishpat acharei shelbish et Aaron ha'ifod v'achoshen. Says the Ramban, when were the Urim v'Tumim placed within the Choshen? Only after Aaron was wearing it. Kimo shama vayiten alav et ha'ifod vayachkor oto b'cheshev ha'ifod vayasem alav et ha'choshen vayiten el ha'choshen et ha'urim ve'et ha'tumim. Ki le'achar kein nitanam bein kiflei ha'choshen. So literally, when you think about it, what are the Urim v'Tumim, or what is the Urim v'Tumim? The answer is, it's the engine, it's the batteries that light up the Choshen. Right? On the front, you have 12 stones representing Shiftei Yisrael, and you have the names of the Shvatim on the shoulders. When you put in the Shem HaMeforash, when you slip it in between the folds of the Choshen, it powers the Choshen. What does the Choshen do? The Choshen is a way of the Kohen Gadol getting some form of divine insight, right? And the Ramban, if he skips down to it, he says, when the Jews were going to fight and they asked, who, mi ya'aleh rishona, which shevet should lead the battle? And the Urim v'Tumim answered, Yehuda Yahaleh, and says the Ramban, with the help of the Urim v'Tumim, it lights up on the Choshen in a way that the Kohen Gadol can decipher. Because obviously the letters Yehuda Ya'aleh light up, but the Ramban says explicitly, those letters can make other words. How does the Kohen Gadol know? So the answer is, it's a gift that the Kohen Gadol has. And skipping down to the end, he says, V'zot madrega mi madregat Ruach HaKodesh. The Kohen Gadol had Ruach HaKodesh to read what the Choshen was telling him. What is Ruach HaKodesh? So it's rare that the Ramban describes it. He says, He lemata min ha-nevuah. You're not a full-fledged Navi if you have Ruach HaKodesh. However, ulemala mibat kol shemishtamshim ba b'bayit sheni la'achar shepaska nevuah upasku urim v'tumim kimo shizkiru rabotenu. Right? So it's something above a bat kol, a voice that comes out from Shamayim, which apparently existed in Bayit Sheni, but it's below Nevuah, it's a middle level. But the Kohen Gadol has divine inspiration, and he can read based on the letters that light up on his breastplate, powered by the Urim v'Tumim. He can read and decipher the message that God is giving for Bnei Yisrael and for Klal Yisrael. Okay? So that's a significant Ramban that says, if somebody asks you what the Urim v'Tumim are, no one ever saw them, right? It's the Shem HaMeforash, also not explained by the Ramban which Shem HaMeforash it was. That's also worthy of discussion. But it's the Shem HaMeforash written by Moshe Rabbeinu himself and placed between the folds of the Choshen, between the front fold and the back fold. It was folded up in the back, and it was placed in there, and it's the Shem HaMeforash that generates, the energy, not to make a joke about it, but like the magic 8-ball, if when you were a kid, it tells you the answer. So the Shem HaMeforash powers the Choshen, powers the magic 8-ball to give us the answers to questions that we ask the Kohen Gadol. How does the Kohen Gadol read it? Since it could be read in many ways, that's Ruach HaKodesh that the Kohen Gadol has. Okay, last Ramban for today, but really, really significant Ramban, at least, for people who focus on it. And it's difficult because I want to focus on a line that doesn't exist in the Ramban. The Ramban was so nervous. We talked about this last year. I'd like to spend just a few minutes on it this year because I think it's so significant. It was so significant. The thing the Ramban saying is so significant that I think the Ramban himself couldn't bring himself to write it. The last pasuk before Shvi'i, Perek Chavtes pasuk Mem Vav says, "V'yadeu ki ani Adonai Elohehem asher hotzeiti otam me'eretz Mitzrayim lishachni b'tocham ani Adonai Elohehem." Now we all say because it's our tradition and because it makes complete sense, says Rashi, al minat lishkon b'tocham, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu took us out of Mitzrayim on condition that He lives amongst us or within us. Now, what does that mean? So we're nervous to say, and we're properly nervous to say, that God wanted to live amongst us. We're much more comfortable saying that we need God, God doesn't need us. Okay, and the Ramban talks about that. And he says that the lamed, lishachni b'tocham, the lamed is generally translated as a bet, right? Sheyomav yadu b'shachni b'tocham, when God lives amongst us, we'll know that He's God. Okay? Ki bocher ata leven Yishai means you chose ben Yishai. Ki bocher ata biben Yishai. Al Hashem ritem et pi lemei miriva, we translate as Al Hashem ritem et pi b'mei miriva v'hadomim lahem. Okay, so that's what Rashi says. It's not for the purpose of living amongst us. God forbid, God doesn't have any needs. It's so that He can. And then when He does, we'll know things about Him. But here, surprisingly, the Ramban quotes the Ibn Ezra and loves it. Aval Rabbi Avraham Amar, Ki lo hotzeiti otam me'eretz Mitzrayim, rak ba'avur ki eshkon b'tocham. Says the Ramban, no, you should read the pasuk exactly as written. God took us out of Mitzrayim so that He could live amongst us. V'zeh, that's what it means. V'tavduna telokim al har hazeh. V'yafeh piresh, says the Ramban. He's right. V'im kain, really important line in the Ramban in his philosophy of the world. V'im kain, yesh bi'inyan sod gadol. Says the Ramban, it's a huge, huge secret. Why? Ki pshat hadavar hashchina b'Yisrael tzorech hedyot v'lo tzorech gavoa. Right? We grew up, normative Judaism believes that God's presence amongst us is to fill a need for us, not to fill a need for God. And the Ramban doesn't complete the thought, but it's obvious. What the Ramban is saying is that Shechina b'Yisrael tzorech gavoa. It's a need of God. It's not just a need of us. And it's exactly like Vahu kinyan shamar katuv Yisrael asher b'cha et pa'er. God says, the Jewish people, through whom I, God, is found to be resplendent, is found to be beautiful, right? It's easier for us to see other examples. V'amar Yehoshua, when God wants to wipe out the Jewish people, says Yehoshua to him, Uma ta'aseh l'shimcha gadol. What's going to happen to your great name, God? What do you mean what's going to happen to your great name? God will continue and we won't. No, the implicit in the pasuk is that if something bad happens to the Jewish people, kiviyachol, something bad happens to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Upsukim rabim ba'ukein. And he quotes other psukim. But I just want to focus on this one line. What does it mean that we have an impact on God? What does it mean that my activities, that your activities, that the activities of Klal Yisrael as a whole have an impact on God? This is a really, really significant point. But it's something that Rav Lichtenstein's writings have in a number of places. It's something that Rav Soloveitchik's writings have in a number of places. And I think it's worth it for a second. In fact, I brought with me this wonderful sefer, Blessings and Thanksgiving. It's one of the sefarim that the Rav has on tefillah. And he has a long, long piece on this. But I just, l'saber ta'ozen, to make it clear to you, I want to read you the following paragraph. It must be then that the master of the world needs us, as it were. As it were in English is kiviyachol, right? It's hard to say it, but he's saying it. In this sense, we refer to him with names like Shechina, Matranita, Kala. Okay? The Shechina, the divine presence in the world, is the recipient of influence, as it were. And we are the givers, the influencers. This means that the Holy One, as it were, conferred some of his grandeur and sovereignty on mortal man, the withering flower and broken vessel, revealing himself to him with the manifestation of the Shechina. Okay, so the Rav's point is much more Kabbalistic. But our point, even without the Kabbalah, is the following. HaKadosh Baruch Hu could have made a world in which man doesn't matter. But he chose not to make that world. He made a world in which he, quote unquote, needs us. Now, what does it mean that he needs us? So the short answer is, again, I've said this before, but I think it's so significant. And I'll tell you why in a second. Right? Ein melech below am, on a simple level. You can't be a king if you have no subjects. You can't be a spouse if you have no spouse. You can't be a husband without a wife. You can't be a wife without a husband. You can't be a father without children. You can't be a mother without children. There are things that when God created the world, even if you're infinite, even if you're omniscient, even if you're omni-everything, you simply can't be X without Y. The words are relational. And so HaKadosh Baruch Hu needs us in that sense, but he also needs us in that he's a reflection of us. And this is an idea that Rav Bick uses very much in the Yud Gimel Midos. When we call on God, we make him more present. And the Rav says this without brachos. Baruch atah Hashem. How do we understand that? So the traditional explanation, which is obviously true, is God is the source of all brachot. But the deeper explanation, which the Rav endorses in this article in the Sefer, and the article is I'm reading from page 123. You can read the whole article. It takes some work, but it's fantastic, and it's really a chiddush, is that if God is reflected by us in this world, then we have the ability to bless God. And when we say Baruch atah Hashem, says Rav Soloveitchik, we mean it. God should be blessed. It's like the Yud Gimel Midos. We are making God more present in this world by calling upon him. We have the ability and the authority to do that. And when we do it, God is literally more present. When Bnei Yisrael make a Kiddush Hashem, we are literally making God more present in this world. We are Mikadei Shem Shamayim, we're making him larger. And Chas v'Shalom, right, the reverse. A Chilul Hashem is literally to make God less present in the world. Now, why is this so significant? Because it places responsibility on us. On some level, and the Ramban says this elsewhere, we are Merkava la Shechina. We are carrying the Shechina on our shoulders. That's an enormous responsibility. But when you're carrying an enormous responsibility, you live up to that. If God said to us explicitly, you are how I am perceived in this world. When you do something great, people say to themselves, wow, the God of the Jews must be something great, and he is made more present in this world. And God forbid the opposite. We have that responsibility to God, and we have that responsibility to the world. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu put Adam Harishon in Gan Eden, La'avdo L'Shamra, that's when it started. People looked at Adam Harishon, people looked at us, and said, we're a reflection of God. And when we reflect God's name in a wonderful way, in a beautiful way, God is more present in the world. We actually impact on his presence. Maybe this is more Kabbalistic, and I don't really understand the words that I'm saying, but I believe it deeply. We should take on that responsibility. We should recognize that our activities in this world, not theoretically, not in some metaphoric way, but literally impact on God's presence. And the better we are, and the more religious we are, and the more committed we are to each other and to Am Yisrael and to Klal Yisrael, the more God is present in this world. I hope that made sense. I think it did. Yashkach to everybody. Shabbat Shalom, and see you next week.